Hello. If you enjoy tales of history and darkness, please consider subscribing to our channel. It helps us bring more of these forgotten stories to light. The autumn of 1918 did not arrive in Chicago with its usual fanfare of crisp air and golden leaves. It swept in on a gray, wet wind that smelled of coal smoke and something else, something new. It was the scent of fear, a metallic tang that clung to the back of the throat. The Great War was still raging overseas, and every day the lists of the lost grew longer, posted in grim columns at Union Station. But now a new front had opened, not in the fields of France, but in the very streets and tenements of the Windy City. They called it the Spanish Lady, or the Grippe. It was an affliction that respected no one. It stalked the mansions on Prairie Avenue and the cramped cold water flats of the back of the yards. The city's hospitals, already stretched thin by the war effort, were buckling. Mercy Covenant Hospital, a towering edifice of brick and limestone on the near south side, was no exception. It had become a fortress besieged, not by an army, but by an invisible, relentless tide. And in the heart of this fortress, there was a light. Her name was Eliza Ward. Eliza was not merely a nurse, she was an institution. In a time when the city was desperate for heroes, Eliza Ward was a saint in starched white. She was the angel of the covenant. She moved through the overflowing wards with a serenity that seemed supernatural. While other nurses, their faces pale and etched with exhaustion, succumbed to panic or fatigue, Eliza remained pristine. Her uniform was always impeccably white, her cap perfectly pleated, her voice a low, soothing melody that could calm the most agitated patient. She had a reputation for working miracles. Men who arrived at the hospital gray-faced and struggling for every breath, men the doctors had already marked as lost, would, under Eliza's care, often find their fever breaking by dawn. She was tireless. She worked double shifts, then triple, seeming to subsist on weak tea and sheer force of will. The families of the afflicted adored her. They would wait for hours in the drafty reception hall just for a kind word from her, for her assurance that their father, or husband, or brother was resting comfortably. "Miss Ward," a young probationer nurse named Beatrice Henty once whispered, her hands shaking as she changed the linen. "How do you do it? How do you keep going?" Eliza paused, her hands gently adjusting the pillow of a sleeping patient. Her face, framed by the white linen of her coif, was beautiful, but it was a cold, classical beauty, like a marble statue. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, met Beatrice's. "We do not have the luxury of fatigue, Nurse Henty," Eliza said, her voice soft but firm, carrying easily over the chorus of coughs that provided the ward's grim soundtrack. "We are the barrier between the city and the dark. We must hold the line. It is not about how we feel. It is about what must be done." Beatrice nodded, feeling both chastened and inspired. Eliza had that effect on people. She made them want to be better, to be stronger. But the angel of the covenant had a wing of her own. Ward C, the long hall at the east end of the building, had been given over to her entirely. The hospital's administrator, desperate to manage the influx, had agreed to let her run it as she saw fit. "The angel's wing," the staff called it. And it was here that her reputation was truly forged. The recovery rates in Ward C were astounding. While the rest of the hospital fought a losing battle, Ward C seemed to be a bastion of hope. The newspapers, hungry for any good news to distract from the war and the overwhelming illness, seized upon her story. "The White Angel of Mercy Covenant," one headline proclaimed. "Nurse Ward's miraculous ward," read another. She was the most adored woman in Chicago, a symbol of the city's grit and compassion. As October deepened and the affliction tightened its grip, the city looked to Eliza Ward. She was their savior, their angel, the one pure thing in a world that had gone gray with misery. They could not have known, would not have dreamed, that the angel's wing was not a place of miracles, but a place of judgment. And the sins the city would later accuse her of were already taking root, hidden behind the most compassionate smile in all of Chicago. The smell of carbolic acid was overwhelming, but it couldn't mask the other, heavier odor of sickness that permeated the air of Mercy Covenant. The hallways were no longer hallways. They were auxiliary wards. Cots lined every available foot of space. their occupants a landscape of misery, coughing and shivering under thin wool blankets. The war had taken so many doctors and experienced nurses, leaving the hospital staffed by old men, young probationers, and those, like Eliza, who simply refused to leave. Dr. Eris Thorne, the hospital's chief physician, was one of the old men. He was a man of science, a pragmatist whose face looked like a roadmap of exhaustion. He lived on coffee and stale bread, and his temper was as frayed as the cuffs of his lab coat. He respected Eliza Ward's efficiency, but her reputation made him uneasy. He didn't believe in miracles. He believed in statistics, and the statistics coming out of Ward C were, frankly, impossible. "She's a marvel, Eris," Administrator Thompson said one evening, the two men sharing a hurried moment in Thorne's cluttered office. "The Tribune wants to do another piece on her. Imagine. The Angel's Wing. It's bringing in donations. People need hope." Thorne ran a hand through his thinning gray hair. "Hope is fine, Thompson, but her numbers are anomalous. Her recovery rate is 30% higher than any other ward, and her other rate is faster." "Faster? The ones who don't recover," Thorne said delicately. "They don't linger. In the other wards, the affliction is a battle. It takes days, sometimes a week. The patient fights. In Ward C, they either rally with remarkable speed, or they are gone in less than 12 hours. It's too clean. The illness is messy. Eliza's ward is not." "She's efficient," Thompson argued, though a sliver of doubt entered his voice. "She keeps the ward meticulously clean. She's a stickler for hygiene. Perhaps that's it." "Perhaps," Thorne said, unconvinced. But he had no time to investigate anomalies. He had a hospital to run. Meanwhile, in Ward C, Eliza's efficiency was on full display. The ward was quieter than the others. The chaos of the hallway cots did not exist here. Eliza ruled with an iron hand and a velvet glove. She permitted only one probationer, Beatrice Henty, to assist her. The rest of the staff were relegated to fetching supplies and cleaning. "Nurse Henty," Eliza said, her voice never rising above a calm monotone. "The linens on cot 12, immediately. We cannot allow dampness. It invites the ague." "Yes, Miss Ward." Beatrice hurried to the cot of a young man, a factory worker who had been brought in that morning. He was delirious, muttering about gears and noise. Eliza herself was tending to a patient at the far end of the ward. This was Mr. Harrison, a banker from Lincoln Park. He was a man of some importance, and his family had ensured he was placed in the Angel's Wing. He was breathing with a shallow, rattling sound that Beatrice had come to dread. Eliza checked his chart. She looked at the man, his face flushed a deep purple, his eyes wide with fear. She placed a cool, damp cloth on his forehead. "Rest now, Mr. Harrison," she whispered. "The fever will break soon. You are in the safest place you can be." Her voice was hypnotic. The man's fearful eyes softened, and he seemed to relax, though his breathing did not ease. Later that night, long after Beatrice had been dismissed to her dormitory for a few hours of fitful sleep, Eliza moved through the ward in the low gaslight. The room was silent save for the chorus of troubled breathing. She stopped at her personal supply cabinet, a tall metal locker she kept locked. She procured the key from a chain around her neck, hidden beneath her starched bib. She opened it. Inside were not just bandages and carbolic soap. There were rows of small, dark blue bottles, each labeled with a simple code. There was also a worn leather diary and a single photograph in a silver frame. A handsome young man in a doughboy uniform, his smile bright and confident. Eliza looked at the photo, her face impassive. She selected one of the blue bottles and a small glass syringe. She moved to Mr. Harrison's cot. The banker was asleep, his mouth open. She paused, looking down at him. Her expression, unseen by any living soul, was not one of mercy. It was one of profound, cold judgment. She thought of the letters she had received. The first, from the War Department, was clinical. The second, from her brother's commanding officer, was full of platitudes about a noble sacrifice. But the third letter, the one she kept in her diary, was from a fellow soldier. It told a different story. It spoke of faulty equipment, of orders from high-ranking, comfortable men who had never seen a trench. Men like Mr. Harrison. "The fever must be cleansed," she whispered to the sleeping man, her voice a near inaudible breath. "The city has a debt." She administered the contents of the syringe into the man's hydration drip. It was a clear, simple fluid. Within moments, the banker's breathing, already shallow, seemed to stutter and catch. A profound peace settled over his features. Eliza Ward checked her watch. She made a note on his chart. Patient's condition worsened rapidly, expired peacefully at 3:17 a.m. She then straightened his blanket, a perfect, compassionate fold over his chest. She returned the bottle to her cabinet, locked it, and went to check on the young factory worker in cot 12. She would need to be strong for him. He was one of the ones she would save. The first week of November brought a false spring, a strange, warm spell that the old-timers called Indian summer. But the warmth did not stop the affliction. It seemed to embolden it. The city's furnaces chugged, filling the air with a thick haze, and the bells of Mercy Covenant tolled almost constantly, signaling the arrival of another ambulance, or, just as often, the departure of the mortician's wagon. The pressure on Eliza Ward was immense. The newspapers had made her a celebrity, and with that celebrity came expectations. The city's elite, who had once fled to private clinics, now used their influence to get their loved ones into Ward C. It was the only place, they believed, where a cure was possible. This is how Eleanor Davies came to be Eliza's patient. She was the wife of Alderman Charles Davies, a man whose name was synonymous with Chicago's political machine. He was a large, ruddy man who smelled of cigars and whiskey, and he was not used to being denied. He had arrived at the hospital like a storm, demanding the angel herself tend to his wife. "She will have the best, do you understand me, Thorne?" Davies had boomed in the administrator's office. "I want that nurse, the one they write about. I want my Eleanor in her ward." Dr. Thorne had protested. "Alderman, Ward C is full. Nurse Ward is already tending to 30 patients." "Then make room!" Davies had slammed a meaty fist on the desk. "I don't care what it takes." A cot was found. A patient, a shoemaker from the West Loop, was quietly transferred to a general ward to make space. Eliza received Mrs. Davies with her usual grace. "We will take excellent care of her, Alderman," Eliza assured him, her calm voice slicing through his bluster. "You must trust us." Eleanor Davies was a pale, bird-like woman, consumed by a fever that left her weak and frightened. She was, by all accounts, a kind woman, known for her charity work, but she was married to a man Eliza despised. Alderman Davies represented everything Eliza had come to see as the city's rot. He was a fixer, a man who pulled strings, a man who had profited from war contracts while boys like her brother Thomas were sent to the front. Beatrice Henty, who was growing more observant with each passing day, watched the dynamic between the nurse and her new patient. She saw Eliza at her most attentive. Eliza spoon-fed broth to Mrs. Davies herself. She read poetry to her from a thin volume of Keats. She seemed, for all the world, to be pouring her very soul into the woman's recovery. "Miss Ward is truly remarkable," Beatrice confided to Dr. Thorne during a rare break. "She's given Mrs. Davies her full attention. I dare say the alderman's wife is looking better already." Thorne grunted. "Let's hope so. The alderman is here twice a day. He's disruptive." But Thorne was also watching. He had noted the shoemaker's transfer. He had also noted the shoemaker, who had been improving in Ward C, had taken a serious turn for the worse after being moved to the general ward. It was as if the magic of Ward C was not transferable. That evening, Eliza prepared for her night rounds. Alderman Davies had just left reeking of brandy after demanding his wife be cured by morning. "She is a trial, that one," Beatrice whispered to Eliza as they tidied the nurse's station. "She is just a frightened woman, Nurse Henty." Eliza replied, her voice smooth. "It is her husband who is the burden." The word burden hung in the air, cold and heavy. Later, the ward was quiet. The gas lamps hissed. Eliza made her way to her locker. She looked at the photo of Thomas. She recalled the last letter she'd received from him, before the official ones. He'd written about the cold, the wet, and the rats, as he called the war profiteers back home. "They're getting rich on this, Eliza," he'd written. "Men like Davies. They're dining on steak while we're eating hardtack and dodging shells." She selected a blue bottle. This one was different from the one she had used on Mr. Harrison. It was not a concentrated dose of the affliction. It was something else, something she had procured from a disreputable pharmacist on the docks. A cardiac tonic, he had called it, that eased suffering in large doses. She approached Eleanor Davies's cot. The woman was sleeping, her breathing shallow. She was frail, but her fever had dipped that afternoon. She was on the path to recovery. "You are married to a sin, Mrs. Davies," Eliza whispered, her hand perfectly steady as she prepared the syringe. "And the city must be purified of its sins, one by one." She looked at the woman's peaceful, trusting face. There was a flicker of something in Eliza's eyes, a moment of hesitation. It was impossible to tell. She moved the syringe to the woman's IV line. "Miss Ward?" Eliza froze. Her back was to the ward, but she recognized the voice. Beatrice Henty. Eliza's posture did not change. She remained a perfect silhouette of professional calm. "Yes, Nurse Henty? I thought I dismissed you." I forgot my shawl." Beatrice stammered, standing in the doorway, her eyes wide, trying to make sense of the scene. The low light. The syringe in Eliza's hand. The small blue bottle on the bedside table. What is that? Is that a new medication from Dr. Thorne? Eliza slowly, deliberately, pulled the empty syringe away from the IV port, having not yet administered the dose. She turned, her face a mask of serene composure. "It is a special vitamin tonic, nurse, to aid her strength. The poor woman is so depleted." Eliza's smile was warm, but it did not reach her cold, winter sky eyes. "You are looking peaked, Beatrice. Go and get your rest. You've worked hard enough." "Yes, Miss Ward, of course." Beatrice fled, clutching her shawl. She didn't know what she had seen, but she knew it was not a vitamin tonic. She had seen the way Eliza's hand had frozen. She had seen the bottle, and she had felt for the first time a chill in the angel's wing that had nothing to do with the November air. Eliza watched her go. She stood by Eleanor Davies's bed for a long time. The moment was broken. The purity of the act was compromised by the witness. She sighed, a small, frustrated sound. She capped the blue bottle and put it back in her pocket. "Not tonight, Mrs. Davies," she whispered. "It seems you will have to wait for your recovery." Dr. Thorne was a man who believed in patterns. In his youth, he had been fascinated by the new science of fingerprinting, the idea that every individual left a unique, traceable mark. He believed that everything, even chaos, had a signature. And the signature of Ward C was beginning to look less like a miracle and more like a forgery. The incident with Nurse Henty had unsettled him. The young nurse had come to him the next morning, pale and trembling, recounting what she had seen. "A blue bottle, doctor, and a syringe. She said it was vitamins, but she was administering it into the IV line and she looked cold." "Cold?" Thorne had pressed. "Or just tired, nurse. We are all tired." "No, sir," Beatrice insisted, her loyalty to Eliza warring with a new, dawning fear. It was like she was posting a letter. Just a task to be done. And Mrs. Davies, she was recovering. Why would she need a special tonic in the middle of the night? Thorne had dismissed her, advising her to keep her imagination in check. But he had not dismissed her claim. He went to the hospital dispensary. "Griswold," Thorne said to the chief pharmacist, "do we stock any vitamin tonics in small blue glass bottles?" Griswold, a man who lived in a world of powders and labels, shook his head without looking up from his ledger. "No, doctor. Vitamins are in short supply. The army takes them all. We have quinine, we have aspirin, and we have carbolic acid. That's the sum of it. Anything else would be a special order. Has Nurse Ward placed any special orders?" Griswold finally looked up. "Nurse Ward? Our angel?" "Goodness, no. She's the most frugal of all the staff. Uses only what the hospital provides. Says it's patriotic not to waste." Thorne left, his suspicion deepening. If the tonic wasn't from the hospital, where had it come from? He decided to do what he did best. He reviewed the charts. He locked himself in his office and pulled the files for every patient who had passed in Ward C over the last month. He compared them to the files from Ward A, the hospital's other main influenza ward. The pattern was stark. In Ward A, the patients who succumbed did so after a protracted struggle. Their charts were a frenzy of notes: fevers spiking and falling, respiratory distress, periods of lucidity, then decline. The average time from admission to expiration was 6 days. In Ward C, the charts were different. They were tidy. The patients who passed did so with shocking speed. A man admitted at 10 a.m. would be gone by 8 p.m. The notes, always in Eliza's perfect looping script, were identical. Patient admitted in severe distress. Condition deteriorated rapidly. Patient expired peacefully. But the most damning discovery was a correlation he hadn't thought to look for. He sorted the Ward C files into 2 piles: recovered and expired. Then he cross-referenced their admission forms. He felt a cold rock settle in his stomach. The recovered pile was filled with factory workers, laborers, clerks, soldiers on leave, and the wives of working men. The expired pile contained Mr. Harrison, the banker. It contained a railroad speculator. It contained a man who owned 3 textile mills. It contained a woman known for her opulent parties. The only exception was Eleanor Davies, who was, bafflingly, making a full recovery. The poor and the working class survived the angel's wing. The wealthy and the powerful did not. Thorne sat back, the implications washing over him. This wasn't mercy. This wasn't negligence. This was something else. This was a selection. He thought of Eliza's brother. He'd been a doughboy, hadn't he? Thorne vaguely recalled the hospital staff taking up a collection for a wreath when the news came. He'd been lost in the Meuse Argonne, an offensive that many, in whispered tones, called a needless waste, ordered by generals far from the line. Thorne looked at the charts again. He thought of Eliza's calm, her efficiency, her unnerving serenity. He thought of the blue bottle. My, he whispered to the empty room. Oh my. He knew he couldn't go to the hospital administrator. Thompson was too enamored with the angel and the donations she brought in. He couldn't go to the police, not yet. He had no proof. He had charts and the word of a terrified probationer. He needed to see for himself. He knew his duty. He had to stop her, but he had to be clever. He needed to catch the angel in the act. And to do that, he would have to set a trap, using the one thing Eliza Ward couldn't refuse: another wealthy patient in desperate need of her care. Dr. Thorne knew his plan was a gamble. It was unethical. It was dangerous. But he weighed it against the horrifying alternative, allowing Eliza to continue her work. He felt the grim weight of his own profession settle on him. Primum non nocere. First, do no harm. But what was the greater harm? To set a trap or to let the wolf remain in the fold? He needed a new patient, and he needed one who wouldn't actually be at risk. He found his answer in the morgue. The hospital, like the rest of the city, had a surplus of unclaimed bodies, men who had succumbed on the streets, flivver accidents, victims of the affliction whose families had already been wiped out. It was a grim reality of 1918. He selected one, a man in his 50s, unidentified, who had passed from a heart ailment 2 days prior. He was, to Thorne's clinical eye, a suitable proxy. He resembled, in build and age, the type of man Eliza seemed to select. This man, Thorne announced to the night staff, his voice carrying the full authority of his position. This is Mr. Abramson, a colleague from my university days. He has been transferred from Passavant Hospital at my personal request. He is gravely ill with the grip. He is to be admitted to Ward C. Nurse Ward will handle his care personally. The staff, accustomed to the chaos, asked no questions. The body, wrapped in blankets and made to look like a living, unconscious patient, was wheeled into Ward C and placed in the cot nearest the nurse's station, the one Mrs. Davies had just vacated after her miraculous and, to Thorne, baffling, full recovery. Mr. Abramson, Eliza said, reading the false chart Thorne had prepared. The chart detailed a weak heart and severe respiratory distress. He is a friend of yours, Doctor. A very old friend, Thorne said, his eyes meeting hers. He was looking for any sign of suspicion, any flicker of doubt. He saw nothing. Eliza's face was a mask of professional empathy. Then I will be honored to care for him, Doctor, she said. You can rest assured he will be in the best of hands. I'm counting on it, nurse. The second part of the trap was Beatrice Henty. The young nurse was terrified, but Thorne had impressed upon her the gravity of the situation. You are a nurse, Miss Henty. Your first duty is to the patient. To all the patients, you must be brave." Beatrice, her face pale but set with new resolve, agreed. "Your job is simple," Thorne instructed, speaking to her in the linen closet, the only place they could be sure of privacy. "You will be on duty with Miss Ward tonight. You will watch her. You will watch the locker. You will watch Mr. Abramson. When she prepares her tonic, you will find a way to distract her. That is all. I will handle the rest." Beatrice's task was to create an opportunity. Thorne's task was to seize it. He would not be in his office. He would be in the empty patient room across from Ward C, the door cracked just enough to see the entrance to the ward and Eliza's personal locker. The night began. The ward was quiet. The false Mr. Abramson lay still under his blankets. Eliza Ward went about her duties with her usual unhurried grace. She checked the charts. She spoke in low, comforting tones to a young soldier recovering from a fever. She adjusted linens. Beatrice, meanwhile, was a nervous wreck. She nearly dropped a bedpan. She spilled a pitcher of water. "Nurse Henty, you are all thumbs tonight," Eliza said, her voice sharp for the first time. "If you are unwell, you must go to the dormitory. I will not have a compromised nurse on my floor." "No, Miss Ward, I'm fine," Beatrice stammered. Just tired. The air is so thick." Eliza gave her a long, appraising look, then dismissed her. "See to the linens in the back, then. I will handle the medications." This was it. Beatrice scurried to the back of the ward. Thorne, watching from across the hall, tensed. Eliza moved to her locker. The key emerged from beneath her bib. The metal door opened with a soft squeak. Thorne saw her pause, looking at the photo of the soldier, as if drawing strength from it. She selected a small blue bottle. She moved to the nurse's station, her back to the ward door, and began to prepare a syringe. She was shielded from Thorne's view by the station's high desk. Now, Beatrice, taking a deep breath, stepped out from the linen closet. Miss Ward, quickly!" she cried out, her voice a convincing performance of panic. "It's Cot 4, the soldier. I think he stopped breathing." Eliza did not panic, but she moved. She set the syringe and the uncapped bottle on the desk and swept past Beatrice to Cot 4. "He is breathing, nurse. It is a shallow sleep. Do not be hysterical." But the distraction had worked. In the 3 seconds Eliza's back was turned, Dr. Thorne slipped from the opposite room, crossed the hall, and entered Ward C. His hand, shaking slightly, darted out. He did not take the syringe. He took the bottle from which it had been filled. He replaced it with an identical blue bottle from his own pocket, one he had filled with harmless saline solution. He was out of the ward and back in his hiding place before Eliza had even finished checking the soldier's pulse. Eliza turned back to the nurse's station, her body language radiating annoyance. "You are letting the panic of this place affect your judgment, Nurse Henty. Go and compose yourself." "Yes, Miss Ward." Eliza picked up the syringe. She looked at the bottle of saline Thorne had left. She paused. Did she notice the switch? Thorne held his breath. She didn't. She administered the medication from the syringe into the IV line of the patient, Mr. Abramson. She then capped the saline bottle Thorne had provided and proceeded on her rounds, the picture of serene duty. Thorne clutched the bottle in his pocket. It was still cold from the night air. He had it. He had the proof. He raced down the back stairs to his laboratory, his heart pounding a rhythm of dread and vindication. Dr. Thorne's laboratory was a small, cramped room in the hospital's basement, smelling of chemicals and gas. In the face of the pandemic, it had been largely abandoned in favor of work on the wards. But Thorne was a physician of the old school. He trusted his microscope and his reagents more than he trusted human observation. He locked the door, a heavy bolt sliding home with a thud. He lit the gas burner, illuminating a bench cluttered with glass beakers, slides, and a heavy brass microscope. He held the small blue bottle up to the light. It was a quarter full of a clear, slightly viscous fluid. His hands, which had been so steady during 100 surgeries, were shaking. He was not just a doctor investigating a medical anomaly. He was a man uncovering a darkness that felt bottomless. He prepared a slide first, placing a single drop of the fluid under the lens of his microscope. He adjusted the focus, leaning in. He had expected a chemical compound, a poison, perhaps a derivative of digitalis or arsenic, something to stop the heart. What he saw made his blood run cold. It was not a chemical. It was biological. The fluid was teeming. He recognized the signature instantly, the same one he'd been seeing for weeks in samples taken from the afflicted. It was the grip itself, but it was different. It was concentrated, a dark swirling culture of the illness, cultivated to a potency he hadn't thought possible outside a dedicated research lab. She's not easing their passing. He breathed, his voice hoarse. She's giving it to them. This explained everything. The speed, the clean charts. She wasn't waiting for the affliction to take its course. She was introducing a massive, overwhelming dose directly into the patient's system. For a healthy person, it would be a terrible challenge. For someone already weakened, someone whose system was already compromised, it was a final, unanswerable blow. But there was something else in the mixture, a faint, oily residue that floated on the surface. He performed a simple chemical test, adding a reagent. The mixture fizzed, turning a pale, sickly yellow. He recognized the signature of a common but potent irritant, an oil derived from the croton plant. It wasn't poisonous in the traditional sense, but when introduced to the bloodstream, it would cause a catastrophic inflammatory response, particularly in the lungs. She was not just giving them the illness, she was adding an accelerant. She was creating a respiratory firestorm. Thorne stumbled back, sitting heavily on his stool. He looked at the bottle. This was not an angel of mercy. This was not a misguided attempt to end suffering. This was a deliberate, calculated, and horrifyingly intimate act of destruction. She was using her medical knowledge as a weapon. He thought of the 2 piles of charts, the rich, who received this condemnation, the poor, whom she seemed to be genuinely nursing back to health. He realized with a jolt why Eleanor Davies had survived. Beatrice had interrupted her. Eliza, compromised, had not administered the fluid. And so, Mrs. Davies, receiving only Eliza's actual nursing care, which was by all accounts excellent, had recovered. The miracle of her recovery was simply the absence of Eliza's final treatment. The whole terrible picture was now complete. The adoration of the city, the angel status, the miraculous recoveries. It was all a performance, a meticulously crafted facade to hide her true work. She was a judge, jury, and executioner, all hidden behind a starched white apron. He knew what he had to do. This was beyond the hospital's authority. This was a matter for the police. He unlocked his door and walked up the stairs, the blue bottle heavy as lead in his coat pocket. He walked past the chaos of the emergency receiving bay, past the desperate families waiting for news. He found a telephone at the main desk. He picked up the receiver and asked the operator to connect him to the 19th precinct. "My name is Dr. Eris Thorne," he said, his voice a flat, dead thing. "I am the chief physician at Mercy Covenant. I need to report a series of unnatural passings." Detective Frank Muldoon was a man who matched the Chicago autumn. He was gray, cold, and smelled faintly of damp wool and cheap cigars. He was too old for the war and too cynical for the patriotism that plastered the city's windows. He had spent 20 years in the Chicago PD, and he'd seen every kind of darkness the city had to offer. He'd investigated union-busting, accidents on the docks, back-alley disagreements, and the grim domestic tragedies of the tenements. But he had never, in his entire career, been called to a hospital to investigate a nurse. He arrived at Mercy Covenant just before dawn, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous, quiet halls. The hospital at this hour was a place of ghosts, the air thick with the sound of sleeping and suffering. He found Dr. Thorne in his office, looking like a man who hadn't slept in a week. "Dr. Thorne," Muldoon said, not bothering to remove his damp fedora. "This had better be good. I've got a city full of problems, and you're pulling me in for unnatural passings during a plague. Every passing is unnatural, Doc." Thorne, without a word, pushed the blue bottle, now corked and sealed, across the desk. He pushed the 2 stacks of charts next to it. "Look at the charts, Detective. Then I'll tell you what's in the bottle." Muldoon was not a doctor, but he was a man who knew how to read a ledger. and these charts were ledgers of a sort. He spent 20 minutes reading, his cigarillo going cold in his fingers. He compared the expired list with the recovered list. He noted the names. Harrison, Davies, the mill owner, Applesauce. Muldoon muttered, a common slang for nonsense. You're telling me she's… What? Culling the herd? Picking off the rich ones? I am telling you, Thorne said, his voice precise and cold, that she is administering a cultivated, concentrated dose of the affliction mixed with a severe inflammatory agent to patients she has selected. Muldoon stared at him. The sheer audacity of the claim was staggering. Eliza Ward, the angel of the covenant, the lady the Tribune is writing about every other day. You're telling me she's a fiend? I am telling you what the evidence shows. I trapped her. I swapped the bottle she was about to use on a proxy patient. This is the original. This is what she uses. Muldoon picked up the bottle. He looked at the clear fluid. And the proxy? Mr. Abramson? He is unaffected. He was already gone when he arrived, Thorne admitted. Muldoon grunted. A trap, using a stiff, clever. And you've got a witness? The other nurse? Miss Henty. She is waiting in the dispensary. She's terrified, but she'll talk. Muldoon was silent for a full minute. He had built his career on understanding motive. Why would a woman like this, an adored angel, do such a thing? The war, Thorne said, as if reading his mind. Her brother, Thomas Ward. He was in the 33rd, lost at Verdun. Muldoon nodded slowly. The war had cracked everyone. He'd seen it in the eyes of the doughboys returning home, the shell-shocked boys who jumped at the sound of a flivver backfiring. So she's got a grudge, Muldoon summarized. A grudge against the men who ran the war. The profiteers, as the socialists call them. I believe so, Thorne said. All right, Doc. Muldoon stood, buttoning his coat. I'll talk to the girl. Then you and I are going to go pay a visit to the angel. Beatrice Henty was, as Thorne had described, terrified. She sat on a stool wringing her hands, her white cap askew. But when Muldoon questioned her, her voice firmed. She recounted the night with Mrs. Davies, the blue bottle, the vitamin tonic, Eliza's coldness. Her testimony was simple, direct, and devastatingly believable. She was always kind to the poor patients, Beatrice finished, her eyes brimming with tears. The ones from the tenements, she saved them. I admired her so much. Admiration is a funny thing, miss, Muldoon said, patting her shoulder awkwardly. Sometimes it just blinds you to the facts. You stay here. Don't talk to anyone. Muldoon and Thorne walked back up to the main floor. The sun was just starting to rise, casting long, sickly yellow beams through the tall windows. They reached the entrance to Ward C. Eliza Ward was standing at the nurse's station, writing in her ledger. She looked up as they approached, her face immaculate, her uniform pristine. She had survived another night. Dr. Thorne, she said, her voice a calm melody. And, Detective, is there a problem? Has something happened to the alderman? We're here to talk to you, Miss Ward, Muldoon said, his voice flat. He stepped into the ward. We have some questions about your methods. Eliza's smile did not falter, but her eyes, those cold winter sky eyes, narrowed just slightly. She placed her pen down with perfect deliberation. I'm sure I don't know what you mean, Detective, she said. My only method is care. Is that what you call it? Muldoon said. He took the blue bottle from his pocket and placed it on the desk between them. It made a sharp click in the quiet room. Eliza Ward looked at the bottle. She looked at Dr. Thorne, who stood behind the detective, his face a mask of grim duty. She looked back at the bottle. For the first time since anyone at Mercy Covenant had known her, the angel's serene mask cracked. Her face did not crumble in fear or register shock. Instead, a slow, cold smile spread across her lips. It was a smile of profound, chilling satisfaction. So, she said, her voice dropping from a melody to a whisper, the doctor has been diligent. You found my special tonic. Muldoon felt a chill go down his spine. Eliza Ward, you are under arrest for the grievous transgressions against the patients of this hospital. Eliza laughed. It was not a loud laugh, but a soft, dry sound, like rustling dead leaves. Transgressions? She said, her eyes alight with a feverish, righteous fire. I am not the one who transgressed, detective. The city did. The men who sent my brother, who sent all the boys, to that machine. The men who get rich while families starve. I am not a fiend. I am a balance. I am the justice this city refuses to enact. She held out her hands, her wrists together, as if offering them. I saved the ones who deserved saving, she declared to the stunned ward as patients began to sit up in their beds. And I cleansed the ones who did not. It was my duty, my real duty. The arrest of Eliza Ward did not happen quietly. As Muldoon produced the handcuffs, a wail went up from the ward. Not from Eliza, but from the patients. "What are you doing?" shouted the young soldier from cot 4, the one whose life Eliza had genuinely saved. "You can't take her, she's the angel. She saved me." "Leave her be," cried a woman from the far end. "She's a saint." Muldoon ignored them. He was a professional. He secured Eliza's hands. But Eliza wasn't finished. This was her stage, her ward, and she would have her final performance. She turned, not to the detective, but to Dr. Thorne. "You, doctor," she said, her voice ringing with a sudden terrible power. "You see sickness. I see sin. You see a plague, a random, chaotic thing. I see a tool. This affliction, it is a great leveler. It is the only thing in this city that walks into the mansions of the rich as easily as it walks into the hovels of the poor. But it is still imperfect." Thorne was white-faced. "Eliza, this is madness." "Is it madness?" she countered, taking a step toward him, forcing Muldoon to tug her back. "Is it madness to see a world choking on its own hypocrisy? I read the papers, doctor. I see the patriotic funds run by men who own the very factories that make the faulty shells. I see the headlines praising the noble sacrifice of boys who were sent to their doom by old comfortable men." She turned her gaze to the cowering form of Beatrice Henty, who had crept out from the dispensary. "You, Beatrice, you saw Mrs. Davies. A kind woman, yes, but her kindness was a silk handkerchief used to wipe the filth from her husband's money. He builds bridges with rotten steel and profits from the war, and she builds orphanages. It is a lie. The whole city is a lie. And your brother, Thomas," Muldoon said, his voice quiet, trying to pierce her fanaticism. "He wouldn't have wanted this." Eliza's face contorted for a brief second, the only crack in her armor of righteousness. The mention of his name was a physical blow. "My brother," she hissed, "was a child. He was a good, sweet boy who believed the lies. He believed in duty and honor, and for his belief, he was given a patch of French mud and a number. I have his last letter. He knew he was being spent, like a dollar bill, by men who would never, ever face the consequences." She stood up straighter, the chains on her wrists glinting in the morning light. "But I," she announced, "am the consequence. I am the reckoning they didn't see coming. When Mr. Harrison, the banker, came to me, shivering with fever, he begged me to save him. He offered me money. He told me he was an important man, and I looked at him, and I saw the face of the man who signed the loans for the war machine. So I eased his passing. I gave him the peace he did not deserve. I used the plague as my instrument. I balanced the books." "That's enough, Miss Ward," Muldoon said, pulling her toward the door. "It will never be enough," she cried, her voice echoing in the stone hallway as they exited the ward. "You can hang me for my sins, you can put me in a cage, but you cannot stop the truth. The city is sick, it is rotten, and I am the only one who had the courage to be the cure." Her voice faded as Muldoon and another officer forced her down the stairs. Back in Ward C, there was a stunned, terrible silence. The patients who had adored her were left to process the horrifying revelation. The angel they had prayed to was a self-appointed executioner. The soldier in cot 4 turned his face to the wall. Dr. Thorne leaned against the nurse's station, the adrenaline leaving him weak and nauseated. Beatrice Henty, tears streaming down her face, slowly walked to Eliza's locker, which was still open. She looked inside. She saw the neat rows of supplies, the clean linens, and she saw the silver-framed photo of the smiling doughboy, Thomas Ward. He looked so young, so full of life, so unaware of the terrible, dark legacy his passing would inspire in the sister who loved him too much, and in a way that was far too twisted. The city of Chicago, already on its knees from the war and the affliction, erupted. The news of Eliza Ward's arrest was a bombshell. It was at first met with disbelief and outrage. The newspapers that had lionized her now scrambled to retract their praise. The Angel of the Covenant became the plague nurse, the demon in white, the Ward C fiend. The hospital was besieged not by the sick, but by reporters and the morbidly curious, all hoping to catch a glimpse of the ward where the angel had held her dark court. Mercy Covenant, once a symbol of hope, became a place of grim fascination. Dr. Thorne, thrust into the spotlight, gave a clipped professional statement, emphasizing that the hospital had acted as soon as the anomalies were confirmed. Beatrice Henty was hidden away, sent to live with family in the countryside, her testimony given as a sworn deposition. The trial, held in the cavernous, drafty Cook County Courthouse, was a spectacle. It was the only thing that could knock the war and the plague off the front pages. The courtroom was packed every day. People wore masks, not just for the grip, but as if to protect themselves from the sheer moral contagion of the case. The prosecution, led by a stern man named Harrison, laid out its case with grim precision. They had Dr. Thorne's testimony. They had the charts, the two distinct piles of recovered and expired, a stark statistical portrait of her justice. They had the blue bottle, its contents analyzed and confirmed by 3 different chemists. It was an unholy mixture, the prosecutor called it, a potent brew of the affliction itself, designed not to heal, but to hasten the end. They brought in the families. Alderman Davies, his face purple with rage, took the stand, weeping as he recounted his wife's narrow escape, painting Eliza as a monster who had smiled in his face while plotting. The son of Mr. Harrison, the banker, spoke of how his father's passing had been too quick, how Eliza had assured them it was a peaceful release, a blessing. The most powerful testimony came from Beatrice Henty. Brought to court under a heavy veil, she spoke in a small, trembling voice. She recounted the night with Mrs. Davies, the blue bottle, the vitamin tonic, and the cold, flat look in Eliza's eyes. She was 2 people, Beatrice whispered, the courtroom straining to hear. She was the kindest nurse I ever knew. She would sing to the children in the general ward. She would hold the hands of the dying. But there was another side, a side that was cold, like a machine. The defense, a court-appointed lawyer who looked as overwhelmed as the rest of the city, had nothing. They could not dispute the facts. The evidence was absolute. Their only strategy was to paint Eliza as a victim of the times, a woman broken by the war, driven to madness by grief and exhaustion. "Look at this woman," the defense lawyer pleaded. "She worked for 36 hours at a stretch. She saw more misery in a month than any of us will see in a lifetime. The war took her brother. The plague took her sanity. This is not a fiend. This is a casualty." But then, Eliza Ward took the stand. Eliza Ward had been silent throughout the trial. She sat, composed and serene, her hands folded in her lap. She looked not like a defendant, but like a visitor, observing the proceedings with a detached clinical interest. When she was called to the stand, a hush fell over the courtroom. She wore a simple gray dress, her hair pulled back. She looked small, almost frail, without her starched white uniform. "Miss Ward," her lawyer began, his voice gentle, "did you, in your grief, suffer a breakdown? Did the stress of the ward cause you to make errors in judgment?" Eliza looked at him. "It was not an error, sir. It was a correction." Her voice was clear, calm, and carried to every corner of the room. The prosecutor, seeing his opening, leaped to his feet for the cross-examination. "A correction, Miss Ward?" he boomed. "You call this selection a correction?" "I do," Eliza said, her eyes meeting his. "You and your physicians, You see only the body. You fight to save a life, any life, as if the life itself is the only thing that matters. You do not ask if the life is worthy. A gasp went through the courtroom. And you, the prosecutor said, his voice dripping with scorn, you made yourself the judge of that worthiness? Someone had to, Eliza replied. I was given a unique position. I saw the city for what it was. I saw the men who came in, sweating and afraid, who in their health were pillars of corruption. Men who dined on steak while my brother ate rats in a trench. Men who profited from the bullets that took him. And when the plague brought them to me, to my ward, I saw it as a gift, a chance to restore balance. So you cleansed them? I offered them the same mercy they offered our boys, Eliza said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet vibrating with intensity. A quick, efficient end. I used the tools I had. The plague was the ailment. I merely perfected it. I aimed it. I gave it purpose. For the poor, the laborers, the soldiers. For them, I gave my all. I used my true skill. I fought for their lives, and I saved them. My angel's wing was a place of miracles. You only condemn the other part, the justice. This was not a defense. It was a confession, a manifesto. The courtroom was utterly silent, captivated by the sheer cold audacity of her conviction. She felt no remorse. She felt no guilt. She felt, as she had in the ward, that she was an instrument of a higher, purer justice. The jury was out for less than an hour. The foreman, a man whose own son was in the Navy, could not even look at her as he read the verdict. Guilty on all counts of grievous and unnatural transgression. The judge, his face grim, adjusted his spectacles. The sentence was a foregone conclusion. The city, horrified by her testimony, demanded the ultimate penalty. They needed to excise this darkness, to prove that she was the anomaly, not the city she had condemned. Eliza Ward, the judge said, his voice heavy, you have taken the sacred trust of your profession, the trust of a city in its darkest hour, and you have twisted it into an instrument of your own cold, private war. You made yourself a god in that hospital ward, and in doing so, you have committed the most profound of sins. It is the sentence of this court that you be taken from this place to the Cook County Jail, and there you shall meet your final reckoning. Eliza Ward did not weep. She did not protest. She simply nodded, a small, polite acknowledgement. As she was led away, she looked out at the sea of faces in the courtroom, the reporters, the families, the curious. Her expression was not one of defeat. It was one of pity. While the city of Chicago reeled from the trial, Dr. Eris Thorne found himself a pariah. He had been the one to unmask the angel, and for that, many in the public who were uncomfortable with their own gullibility subconsciously blamed him. Donations to Mercy Covenant dried up. The hospital, once a beacon, was now a place of scandal. Dr. Thorne, consumed by a need to understand how, not just why, but how, she had done it, returned toward C. The ward was closed, a heavy padlock on the door, a no admittance sign barring entry. He used his master key. The room was cold and sterile, the beds stripped, the air thick with the smell of dust and carbolic soap. It was a tomb. His footsteps echoed. He went directly to her personal locker, the one Muldoon's men had emptied of its evidence. But they had been looking for the blue bottles, the tonics. Thorne was looking for something else. He ran his fingers along the inside of the metal cabinet, his knuckles rapped against the back wall. It wasn't solid. He found a small catch, hidden behind a false panel at the back of the top shelf. He depressed it, and the panel sprang open. Behind it was a small hidden compartment. Inside were two items. The first was a small leather-bound diary. The second was a set of medical journals, technical texts on bacteriology and chemical compounds. He opened the journals first. They were filled with her neat, looping script, but the notes in the margins were something else. They were precise, scientific, and terrifying. She had been studying. She had cross-referenced texts on incubation, on inflammatory agents. She had notes on accelerating respiratory decline and cultivating samples from patient sputum. She had not just stumbled upon her method. She had researched it. She had designed it. This was not a crime of passion or grief-fueled madness. This was a cold, calculated, scientific project. Then he opened the diary. It was not filled with rants against the rich or odes to her lost brother. It was a ledger. It was a logbook of her real work. It began the month after she received the news of Thomas's passing. August 14th, admitted Mr. Gr., a speculator, complained of his losses on the stock market. His losses would feed 100 families. I saw Thomas's face. I administered the first tonic. It was clumsy. He lingered for 2 days. I must be more efficient. September 2nd, Mrs. P. admitted. Her jewels were gaudy. She complained about the quality of the soup. She did not know what real hunger was. I have refined the formula. The new agent. It is much faster. She passed peacefully in her sleep. Dr. Thorne commended me on my clean ward. September 20th. A young soldier, Britt Hayes. He has Thomas's eyes. He fought for him. I sat with him all night. I willed him to live. I gave him the best of everything. He will recover. He is one of the worthy. October 11th, Mr. Harrison. The banker. His name was in Thomas's last letter. Men like Harrison. He was afraid. He should have been. This was not a correction. This was an execution. It felt righteous. Thorne closed the diary, his hands slick with a cold sweat. He had believed he was dealing with a woman broken by grief. He was wrong. He was dealing with a zealot, a systematic predator who had used the fog of the pandemic to hide her campaign. He understood now why she had been so calm. In her mind, she had done nothing wrong. The only sin was in getting caught. He left the diary in the locker and sealed the false panel. He locked the cabinet. He locked the ward. Some things, he decided, were too dark for the world to see. The trial had provided a why. This diary showed a how that was too methodical, too cold, and too humanly terrible to comprehend. The days between Eliza's sentencing and her final appointed day were thick with a strange, febrile anxiety. The war in Europe was drawing to a close. The armistice was rumored to be days away. But Chicago could not celebrate. The Spanish lady still stalked the streets, and the shadow of Eliza Ward's gallows loomed over the city. She had become a dark obsession. Had she been a lone monster? Or was she, as she claimed, a product of the city itself? Had the war and the plague driven everyone mad? People looked at each other differently on the streetcar. They looked at the nurses in the remaining hospitals with a new, terrible suspicion. The angel of mercy archetype was shattered, replaced by the image of Eliza's cold smile and the small blue bottle. In the taverns, the talk was of nothing else. She was a fiend, plain and simple, one man would declare, slamming his glass. A menace. She got what she deserved. I don't know, another would whisper, leaning in. Did you read what she said about the profiteers? My nephew? He's in France. He wrote the same things. Maybe she wasn't all wrong. Maybe she was just too right. That's red talk, the first would counter. You're yellow. She was a plague herself. Eliza, held in the cold stone of the Cook County Jail, was a model prisoner. She was quiet, polite, and uncomplaining. She read the Bible that the prison chaplain gave her, but when he came to offer her comfort and last rites, she politely declined. I have already made my peace, chaplain, she said, her voice soft. My accounts are balanced. But my child, the chaplain pleaded, you must repent. You must ask for forgiveness. Eliza looked at him, her winter sky eyes clear and calm. Forgiveness? From whom? From the men I cleansed? I think not. From your God. My God is one of balance, chaplain. A God of justice. He understands my work. He gave me the plague as a sword, and I used it. The chaplain left her cell, deeply disturbed. He had met many who were condemned. He had met men consumed by guilt and men consumed by rage. He had never met one so consumed by certainty. Dr. Thorne in these last days found no peace. He had done the right thing. He had saved lives. But he felt no victory. He had only exposed the wound, not healed it. He found himself walking the halls of Mercy Covenant at night, haunted by the echo of her words. I am the consequence. The city, and the man who had unmasked her, waited. They waited for the war to end. They waited for the plague to break. And they waited for the final grim act of justice that would, they hoped, cleanse the city of Eliza Ward's sins and allow them to forget the terrible truths she had spoken. The morning of the reckoning was cold and brutally clear. A sharp wind blew off Lake Michigan, snapping the flags that hung at half-mast for the war's dead. The city had, just days before, celebrated the armistice, the end of the Great War. The streets had been full of cheering, weeping crowds. But today the mood was one of grim, sober finality. Inside the walls of the Cook County Jail, the atmosphere was heavy and still. Eliza Ward had been awake all night, not in prayer, but in writing. She had filled page after page with her neat, looping script. Not a confession, but a final, detailed accounting of her work, which she entrusted to a guard to be delivered to Dr. Thorne. "He is the only one who will understand the science," she said. She was offered a final meal. She requested only tea and a piece of dry toast. When the warden and the guards came for her, she stood without prompting. She wore the same simple gray dress from her trial. Her face was pale, but her expression was one of absolute, unnerving serenity. "Is it time?" she asked. The warden, a gruff man who had seen this walk many times, just nodded, unable to speak. The walk to the gallows was short, down a stone corridor and into a cold, open-air courtyard, hidden from the street by high walls. The required witnesses were there: a doctor, a handful of reporters, Detective Muldoon, and the judge who had sentenced her. Dr. Thorne had been invited, but he had refused. He was at the hospital, tending to the sick. Eliza Ward looked at the grim wooden structure. She did not falter. She did not weep. She ascended the steps with the same steady, efficient grace she had used to walk the halls of Ward C. The chaplain began to pray, his voice shaking in the cold. "The Lord is my shepherd." Eliza looked up, not at the chaplain, but at the sliver of gray Chicago sky visible above the walls. She seemed to breathe in the cold, smoky air. The executioner, his face hidden by a hood, moved to place the final black covering over her head. "Miss Ward," the warden said, his voice rough, "do you have any last words?" Eliza turned her head toward the small crowd of witnesses. Her eyes found Detective Muldoon. She smiled. It was the same smile she had given him in the ward. The cold, satisfied smile of a job completed. "My only sin," she said, her voice clear and strong, "was that I could not save them all." The witnesses shuddered. It was unclear who "them" was. The rich she had failed to cleanse, or the poor she had failed to protect. The hood was placed over her head. The final mechanisms were put in motion. The angel of the covenant, the most adored nurse in Chicago, the woman who had appointed herself the city's judge, met her final, state-sanctioned reckoning. The city of Chicago exhaled. The plague nurse was gone. The war was over. And as if on cue, the Spanish lady began to recede. The worst of the affliction had passed, leaving the city scarred, hollowed out, and desperate to forget. Eliza Ward's story was buried. It was an embarrassment, a dark chapter in a time everyone wanted to put behind them. The newspapers, eager for the Roaring Twenties to begin, focused on jazz, prohibition, and the rising stock market. Mercy Covenant Hospital quietly changed its name, becoming Lakeside General, and Ward C was eventually renovated, its walls whitewashed, its ghosts papered over. But the people involved could not forget. Beatrice Henty never nursed again. The sight of a syringe, the smell of carbolic acid, was too much. She married a farmer, moved to rural Iowa, and devoted her life to raising chickens and children, never once speaking of the winter she spent in the Angel's Wing. Detective Muldoon retired a year later. He'd seen the worst of humanity, but Eliza Ward had shaken him. He'd seen greed and rage and desperation, but he had never seen such cold, righteous conviction. He spent his retirement fishing on the Fox River, trying to forget the look in her eyes. Dr. Eris Thorne received Eliza's final package. He read her logbook, her detailed scientific confession. He was horrified by it, but as a man of science, he was also impressed. It was a brilliant, twisted piece of work. He did not give it to the police. He locked it away with her diary. He worked at the hospital until his own passing, a respected, if somewhat haunted, figure. He never again allowed a nurse to have a personal supply cabinet. The Angel of the Covenant became a macabre footnote, a ghost story told by probationer nurses to scare each other in the dark. They said that on cold November nights, you could still smell her tonic in the halls and hear her soft footsteps, checking on the patients, deciding who was worthy. History is not a clean, tidy thing. It is not a sterile ward. It is a messy, chaotic place, filled with motives we cannot understand, and darkness we refuse to acknowledge. Eliza Ward's story is a chilling reminder of that. Was she a monster? A fiend in white? Or was she, as she claimed, a consequence? Was she a woman driven mad by grief? Or was she the only sane person in a world that had gone insane first? The war had taught her that life was cheap, and that noble men could send thousands to their doom without flinching. The plague had given her the perfect weapon, a natural disaster that provided cover for her own unnatural justice. She was, perhaps, all of those things. She was an angel of mercy who genuinely, skillfully, and compassionately saved the lives of the poor and the downtrodden. She was also a cold, systematic executioner who used her knowledge to cleanse a society she had judged and found wanting. She was a paradox, a healer who hastened the end, a symbol of hope who wielded a tonic of despair. The true sin of Eliza Ward may not have been her dark deeds, but the mirror she held up to the city. She showed them that the line between justice and vengeance, between mercy and judgment, is terrifyingly thin, and that in the heart of the most adored angel, a terrible, cold reckoning can be waiting. The angel's wing at Mercy Covenant is long gone. But the questions Eliza Ward raised remain, whispering in the cold, gray Chicago wind. How much darkness can a city create before that darkness begins to take human form? And how many angels are walking among us, balancing their own secret ledgers?